Путинский президент Vladimir Putin был forced to apologize recently, calling it a tragic incident, a rare occurrence in his 25-year dictatorship. But this time, that iron rule has been broken in just a week. In just a few short days, the Kremlin's most fundamental doctrines have been trampled, and now, before the eyes of the world, an empire is cracking and crumbling.
Russia, once a fearsome energy giant, now begs China for fuel. Once commander-in-chief of a superpower army, it now imports troops from Cuba and Colombia to fill its ranks. Its most reliable Arab allies have deserted it. Worst of all, Putin himself has been forced to formally apologize to a small neighbor in front of the cameras.
Vladimir Putin had to personally call the leader of Azerbaijan, a country that was once considered Moscow's backyard, where he could act at will, to officially apologize to the world. That moment, at first glance, seems like a small detail in the flow of history, but make no mistake. It is just the smallest tip of a giant iceberg that is gradually being revealed. Because this is not simply a story about an unfortunate phone call, but the death knell of the illusion of Russia as a great power, a fairy tale that Putin himself has been telling for more than 2 decades.
These 4 events, when considered together, are not a catastrophic failure, but evidence of systemic bankruptcy. These 4 successive collapses tell the story of how Russia's military, economic, diplomatic, and personal power has evaporated. So how did a regime that had claimed invincibility for years prepare itself for such a humiliating end in such a short time?
To understand how this total destruction came about, we must examine each link of this chain of collapse with the meticulousness of an expert examining open-source data. The details of how Putin single-handedly engineered this chaos lie before us like a damning intelligence report. The root of this systemic rot lies in chronic corruption and lack of accountability that has accumulated over 20 years. The collapse always begins with betrayal by the most loyal friends. The first horseman of the apocalypse, diplomatic death, has arrived. Have you heard of the Arab-Russian summit that Putin had been touting for months as proof of Moscow's global power? Probably not, because it turned into one of the worst diplomatic failures in Kremlin history, quietly and shamefully canceled. Even the Moscow Times, known for its anti-Western views, could not cover up the humiliation, a blow to Putin's image of power that he had spent years cultivating. According to the newspaper sources in the Kremlin, only a handful of the 22 invited Arab leaders bothered to come to Moscow. What's more painful is that countries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates, UAE, which Russia considers key allies in the Middle East, have refused to even grant Putin an appointment. This isn't procrastination, it's a heavy steel door slammed in Putin's face. Putin, who once saved the regime in Syria, ordered the Libyan revolution, and hosted African leaders in his palace, has now become persona non grata in the Middle East and the global South, utterly discredited. A power vacuum is not tolerated, and any credibility Putin lost in the Ukraine quagmire has been quickly filled by other factors. Putin's diplomatic collapse is not just happening in faraway places, but in the very backyard that Russia once considered its untouchable sphere of influence. And the most painful blow in this series of isolations has come from lands that Moscow once considered under its absolute control. According to the latest report by the prestigious German Marshall Fund, Russia's military weakness in Ukraine has created a huge strategic vacuum in the South Caucasus region, a region that has been a symbol of Kremlin power and influence for decades. Countries like Armenia and Azerbaijan, which for years took orders from Moscow and relied on its arbitration, no longer see Russia as a hegemon or protectorate. Instead, they see it as weak, unreliable, preoccupied with its own problems, a paper tiger. This erosion of power has been made more concrete by the transformation of Moscow's peacekeeping forces in the region into ineffective observers. Neither Baku nor Yerevan are now knocking on the Kremlin's door to solve their problems. Putin has become an isolated leader,
unable to control even his own neighbors, let alone global allies, and unable to even enforce his will within his own sphere of influence. The erosion of diplomatic power has inevitably been accompanied by military and economic collapse. Once touted in propaganda films as the world's second strongest army, the Russian military machine is now forced to beg for soldiers from Cuba, a country struggling with poverty and sanctions because it cannot find enough soldiers to send to the front lines. According to a shocking scandal uncovered by the prestigious Spanish newspaper El País, and later confirmed by Ukrainian military intelligence documents, Russia is luring some 20,000 young Cubans into the Ukrainian slaughterhouse with false promises of high salaries and the right to Russian citizenship. Independent analysis by the magazine Small Wars Journal also shows that the entire process is essentially a recruitment campaign based on sheer lies and manipulation. The moral and logistical rot in the Russian military has become clear, but this is no mere mercenary deal. It is an admission that a superpower has failed militarily and demographically, has exhausted its own manpower, and is resorting to the most desperate methods to fill the gaps on the front lines. It also shows how badly the mobilization system has collapsed. The fact that the Kremlin is now trying to hide its battlefield losses by appealing outside its borders exposes the regime's weakness. This military defeat is also an admission that Russia has found itself in an untenable position. If a state cannot convince its citizens to go to war and is forced to send the youth of a poor island to die on the front lines, then that state has exhausted its military capabilities. This is not a strategic move, but strategic desperation. And right after the military defeat, the third and most ironic horseman of the apocalypse appeared: economic collapse. This was truly one of the greatest tragedies of modern history. Russia, which for years had threatened Europe by turning off the taps on its gas and oil, turning energy into a strategic weapon, now had to turn to Asia for help, unable to provide enough fuel for both its army and its people. According to a report by KyiV Independent, based on analysis of satellite imagery and commercial data, Ukraine's relentless kamikaze drone attacks over the past 6 months have destroyed about 40% of Russia's oil refining capacity. This is a technical breaking point. Cheap Ukrainian technology has destroyed Russia's massive and cumbersome energy infrastructure. The economic collapse was evident in miles-long lines at gas stations and created civil panic among farmers left helpless in their fields. Export bans, panic buying, and soaring prices turned the crisis into a management disaster. Russia's economic backbone was held up by Ukraine's clever innovations. So what did the Kremlin do in response? In an effort to hide its embarrassment, it signed emergency deals to import 150,000 tons of gasoline a month from countries like China and Singapore. The destruction of the giant refineries in Ryazan, St. Petersburg, Smolensk, Sizy, and Volgograd forced Russia to look to outside sources to make up for the shortfall. It was a humiliating display of helplessness, especially for a country that once prided itself on being an industrial power. The former energy bully has now become a fuel importer. This is the most concrete, undeniable picture of economic collapse. It is no longer just a matter of the value of the ruble. It is a matter of the lifeblood of the war machine, oil, being drained from its veins. Diplomatic betrayal, military bankruptcy, and economic collapse. These three horsemen have given way to the fourth and deadliest horseman: personal humiliation. And we return to the moment when it all began, when all these symptoms of collapse crystallized in a single moment: Vladimir Putin's apology. According to a report by Anadolu Agency and Kavkaz Media, based directly on the Kremlin press release, Putin officially apologized over the phone to his counterpart Ilham Aliyev for the Azerbaijani plane being mistakenly shot down by Russian peacekeepers. This is not a normal diplomatic gesture in international relations.
This was the image Putin had spent a quarter of a century building of the strong leader, the one who never backs down, who never admits mistakes, who never apologizes, shattered by his own words. Putin's entire political career had been built on the promise of healing the national humiliation caused by the collapse of the Soviet Union. He was the leader who brought Russia back to the negotiating table and refused to bow to the West. But in that phone call, he bowed. The fear that Russia's traditional hegemonic role could now be filled by Turkey, Iran, and even the West has exposed the reality that Moscow cannot even control its own regional security. This is not just a diplomatic failure, it is a complete reshaping of regional geopolitics. Russia is no longer a reliable partner to all the countries around it, but has become nothing more than an obstacle. Former Soviet satellite states are taking this opportunity to escape Moscow's shadow. This apology moment is shocking even on its own, but when combined with the other three horsemen, it reveals the true scale of the destruction. Arab leaders abandoned him like a leper, begged for troops from Cuba, asked for fuel from China. The cancellation of the Arab summit has damaged the Kremlin's efforts to maintain power in the Middle East, despite the war in Ukraine. This is concrete evidence of the loss of international prestige. It reveals how fragile Russia's alternative economic support network built to cope with Western sanctions is. If key Arab actors like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Egypt are shunning Russia, it means the Kremlin is now seen not as a long-term partner, but as a sinking ship. All these events were different parts of a profound display of weakness and powerlessness that culminated in that moment of apology. Putin is now a leader who can no longer control his friends or his enemies, whose charisma and ability to deter have all but disappeared. The image of a strong leader, which Putin has been polishing for years with his propaganda machine, is now nothing more than an outdated, empty joke, out of touch with the painful reality on the ground. Power is a perception, and Putin's perception of invincibility was destroyed forever with that phone call. This personal humiliation was not only the death of a leader, but also the death of the great power doctrine he represented. So why did it all happen at the same time? Absolutely not. These four events are four different symptoms of the same cancer. And the name of that cancer is Putin's doctrine, called the restoration of the great power, which is detached from reality and fueled by arrogance. This is systemic corruption. The equation is simple. Without military power, while you have failed in Ukraine, you have failed in Ukraine. You have no diplomatic influence. Without economic power, you cannot maintain that military power. And under the weight of all these failures, when a leader's personal charisma collapses, the whole structure collapses. The military defeat in Ukraine triggered the economic collapse. The combination of the two has systematically destroyed Russia's appeal and prestige on the international stage. And the combined weight of all these failures has finally crushed Putin's image and personal charisma. It is an unstoppable domino effect, and the final piece is about to fall. The situation facing Russia and Putin is no longer a problem that can be overcome by simple crisis management or a change of strategy. What Russia is experiencing is much deeper than a strategic failure. This is not a temporary illness that can be cured. It is an incurable disease that originates at the heart of the system. The corruption, incompetence, and disconnection from reality that have been eating away at the army, the state, and society for years have become unconcealable under the pressure of the war in Ukraine and have brought the entire system to the brink of collapse. A system where supposedly modernized tanks are just painted over, supposedly manufactured missiles are actually non-existent, and supposedly trained soldiers are sent to the front lines unprepared cannot survive in a real war. And now, the impossible is becoming a reality. There is no easy way back from this strategic impasse.
History has shown us that when the four horsemen of the apocalypse appear at the same time, it is a harbinger of disaster. For Russia, the way back is now almost completely closed. A state that has been completely isolated, abandoned even by its closest diplomatic allies, its army exhausted and unable to meet its most basic needs, its economy collapsed under the weight of war, and its leader lost all charisma and became afraid of his own shadow, has no chance of surviving as a great power in the modern world. Putin's options are no longer about winning or losing. His options are limited to how quickly and bloody he will fall. Every day that passes, every burned-out Russian tank on Ukrainian soil is another nail in the Kremlin's coffin. This collapse is no longer just a theory of military analysts, but a concrete reality confirmed by data from the field, international reports, and most importantly, the actions of the Kremlin itself. As you can see, the four events that have occurred over the past few days are not the beginning of the end. They are the very end, announcing the death of an empire to the world. Diplomatic death, military defeat, economic collapse, and personal humiliation. The four horsemen of the apocalypse are no longer mere theories. They have become concrete realities, knocking on Moscow's doors and galloping through the halls of the Kremlin. Vladimir Putin's empire of more than a quarter century, built on fear and oil, is now dissolving before our eyes like a fast-forwarded movie, leaving no trace of the power it once boasted about.